The Arizona sun hung low over Tombstone like a blood-orange coin, casting long shadows across the dusty Main Street. Sam McCaid adjusted his weathered hat and led his chestnut mare Belle toward the Blue Elk Saloon. At 43, Sam carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen too much and said too little. His steel-gray eyes missed nothing, yet revealed even less. "Hi, how are you? Sorry to interrupt your story, but what I'm going to ask you is really quick and it will really help the channel to grow and create new stories. Just click below the video image to subscribe. You'll be doing an act of kindness and encouragement to those who are just starting out. Thank you very much, and continue with your story." The saloon's batwing doors creaked in the evening breeze as miners and cowboys filtered in for their nightly refuge from the desert heat. Sam had no intention of joining them. He preferred the company of his horse to the hollow laughter and whiskey-fueled boasts that echoed from within. As he secured Belle's reins to the hitching post, a small figure emerged from the shadows between buildings. The boy couldn't have been more than 12, his clothes torn and dust-caked, his face streaked with tears that had carved clean lines through the grime. Mister, please." The boy stumbled forward, his voice cracking with desperation. "You gotta help me." Sam turned slowly, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his gun belt. In Tombstone, desperation often came with a price, and trust was a luxury few could afford. "Easy there, son," Sam said, his voice low and measured. "What's got you all worked up?" The boy's eyes darted nervously around the street before fixing on Sam's weathered face. "My name's Eli Sanders, mister. My little sister Clara. She's gone missing near the old farm outside town. The one folks say is cursed." Sam's jaw tightened. He'd heard whispers about that place, the decrepit farmland that sat like a festering wound on the edge of Tombstone. Most locals crossed themselves when they passed it, muttering about bad luck and worse things. "Missing how long?" Sam asked, crouching down to meet the boy's eyes. 3 days now." Eli's voice trembled. "She was picking wildflowers near the fence line when she just vanished. Nobody will help us look. They're all too scared of Silas Cormack." The name hit Sam like a cold wind. Silas Cormack, the land baron who controlled half the territory around Tombstone with an iron fist and a network of hired guns. If Cormack was involved, this boy's sister was in more danger than anyone wanted to admit. "Why come to me, boy? I'm just a drifter." Eli's eyes blazed with a desperate intensity that reminded Sam of his own younger self. "Because you're the only one who ain't afraid. And because—" He glanced around again, then leaned closer. "My pa died trying to tell folks about what's really on that land. Before he passed, he told me something important." Sam waited, his patience worn thin by years of hearing tall tales and broken promises. "He said there's something buried on that farm, something worth more than all the silver in these hills. And if someone were to buy that land—" Eli's voice dropped to a whisper. "Buy that farm and you'll have a fortune." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. Sam studied the boy's face, searching for signs of deception or childish fantasy. Instead, he saw only raw, desperate honesty. "That's quite a claim, son. What makes you think your pa knew anything about buried treasure?" "Because he used to work for the Sanders family, the original owners before Cormack took it. Pa was their foreman for 20 years. He knew every inch of that land, every secret it held." Eli's hands clenched into small fists. "Cormack killed him for it. Made it look like an accident, but I know the truth." Sam felt something stir in his chest, an emotion he'd buried deep years ago. The boy's pain was real, his fear genuine. And if there was even a chance that Clara Sanders was alive— "Where's your ma in all this?" "Died birthing Clara. It's just been me and her since pa passed." Tears threatened to spill from Eli's eyes. "She's all I got left, mister. Please ... I can show you where she disappeared. I can tell you everything Pa told me about the land." Sam stood slowly, his mind racing. He'd spent years avoiding entanglements, keeping his distance from other people's troubles. But something about this boy's desperation cut through his carefully constructed walls. This Cormack, he's got the sheriff in his pocket? Sheriff Malloy tries to do right, but Cormack's got dirt on half the town. And his men ... Eli shuddered. They ain't the type to ask questions before they shoot. Sam looked down the street toward the sheriff's office, where a lone figure sat on the porch, badge glinting in the fading light. Frank Malloy had a reputation as a decent man caught in an indecent situation. But decent men sometimes made hard choices when their families were threatened. Tell me about this fortune your pa mentioned. Eli's eyes lit up with hope. Pa said the original Sanders family found something on their land, something the government would pay handsomely for. But before they could cash in, Cormack started pressuring them to sell. When they refused, he made a cutting gesture across his throat. And you think Clara stumbled onto whatever's buried out there? I think she saw something she shouldn't have. Maybe Cormack's men were digging, or maybe she found something herself. All I know is she's gone, and nobody's looking for her except me. Sam felt the familiar weight of decision pressing down on him. He could walk away Mount Bell and ride out of Tombstone before sunrise. It's what he'd done a dozen times before in a dozen different towns. But the boy's words echoed in his mind. Buy that farm, and you'll have a fortune. More than the promise of wealth, though, it was the image of a 12-year-old girl, alone and frightened, that made his choice for him. All right, son. I'll help you look for your sister, but I do this my way, understand? No running off half-cocked, no playing hero. You do exactly what I tell you when I tell you. Eli's face transformed with relief and gratitude. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. ... I'm sorry, I don't know your name. Sam McCaid. And Eli? Sam's voice carried a warning that made the boy straighten. If you're lying to me about any of this, about your sister, about your pa, about what's on that land, I'll find out. And you won't like what happens next. I ain't lying, Mr. McCaid. I swear on my pa's grave. Sam nodded grimly. Then we start first thing tomorrow. Meet me here at dawn and bring whatever your pa told you about that land. Every detail, no matter how small. As Eli scampered away into the gathering darkness, Sam remained by his horse, staring out toward the edge of town where the cursed farmland lay shrouded in shadow. He'd made his choice, but something told him this was just the beginning of a journey that would test everything he thought he knew about Tombstone, about himself, and about the price of doing what's right. The evening wind carried the scent of sage and something else, something that smelled like secrets buried too long in the desert sun. Dawn broke over Tombstone with the promise of another scorching day. Sam McCaid stood outside the Blue Elk Saloon, checking his weapons and supplies while Bell stamped impatiently beside him. The streets were still mostly empty, save for a few early risers heading to the mines and the occasional stray dogs searching for scraps. Eli Sanders appeared right on schedule, clutching a worn leather satchel against his chest. The boy looked like he hadn't slept, his eyes red-rimmed but determined. You bring what I asked for? Sam inquired, not bothering with pleasantries. Everything Pay ever told me about the Sanders farm. Eli opened the satchel to reveal a collection of hand-drawn maps, faded photographs, and yellowed papers. These maps show the original property lines before Cormack started buying up surrounding land. And this ... He pulled out a small, tarnished locket. This belonged to my ma. Pa said it has something to do with the secret. Sam examined the locket carefully. It was old, probably dating back to the 1860s, with intricate engravings that looked like they might be some kind of code or symbols. What did your pa say about these markings? He said they weren't just decoration. Said they were directions left by the original Sanders family for someone who knew how to read them. Eli's voice dropped to a whisper. Pa thought they led to whatever's buried on the land. Before Sam could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed down the street. 3 riders emerged from the morning haze, their faces hard and their hands resting casually on their gun belts. Sam recognized the type immediately, hired muscle, the kind of men who ask questions with bullets. "Well, well," called out the lead writer, a scarred man with cold blue eyes. "If it ain't the Sanders boy, still sniffing around where he don't belong." Eli instinctively moved closer to Sam, who remained perfectly still, his hand near his Colt .45. "Morning, gentlemen," Sam said evenly. "Beautiful day for a ride." The scarred man's attention shifted to Sam, sizing him up like a predator evaluating potential prey. "Don't believe we've been introduced, stranger. Name's Jake Morrison, and I work for Mr. Silas Cormack. He's the man who owns most everything worth owning around these parts. Sam McCaid, just passing through. Is that so?" Morrison's smile was all teeth and no warmth. "Funny thing about passing through. Sometimes folks get lost along the way. End up places they shouldn't be, asking questions that ain't their business." Sam's voice remained calm, but his eyes hardened. "I'll keep that in mind." Morrison leaned forward in his saddle. "See that you do. And boy," he turned his attention back to Eli, "your sister's disappearance is a real tragedy. But accidents happen when children wander where they shouldn't. Best to let sleeping dogs lie, if you catch my meaning." The threat was clear as desert sky. Sam felt his jaw clench, but he kept his expression neutral. "Appreciate the advice. We'll be sure to stay out of trouble." "Smart man." Morrison tipped his hat mockingly. "Come on, boys. Mr. Cormack's expecting us." As the three riders disappeared down the street, Eli let out a shaky breath. "Those are Cormack's men. Jake Morrison's killed more folks than cholera in these parts. I figured as much." Sam studied the boy's pale face. "You still want to do this? Once we start looking for your sister, there's no backing down. Men like Morrison don't give second warnings." Eli's chin jutted out with stubborn determination. "Clara's counting on me. I ain't backing down." Sam nodded approvingly. The boy had sand. He'd give him that. "Then let's pay a visit to Sheriff Malloy. I want to hear his version of events before we head out to that farm." The sheriff's office sat at the corner of Main and Fremont, a modest adobe building that had seen better days. Frank Malloy looked up from his desk as Sam and Eli entered, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Eli, son, I told you yesterday. There ain't much more I can do about Clara. My men searched the area where she disappeared, but you didn't search the farm itself," Sam interrupted, introducing himself with a firm handshake. "Why's that, Sheriff?" Malloy's eyes darted nervously toward the window. "That land belongs to Silas Cormack now. Can't just go tramping around a man's property without cause. A missing child isn't cause enough. Look, Mr. McCaid, I understand your concern, but there's no evidence Clara ever set foot on Cormack's land. For all we know, she could have wandered off into the desert or—" He trailed off, unwilling to voice the darker possibilities. Sam leaned against the desk, his presence filling the small office. "What can you tell me about the original Sanders family? The ones who owned that farm before Cormack?" Malloy's discomfort was palpable. Ancient history. They sold out and moved on like a lot of folks do. Eli here says they were forced out. Says his pa knew something about what happened to them. Thomas Sanders had a lot of theories about a lot of things, Malloy said carefully. Doesn't mean they were true. Sam studied the sheriff's face, reading the fear and frustration there. "You're scared of Cormack." "I'm realistic about Cormack," Malloy corrected. "He's got money, influence, and men who aren't particular about how they solve problems. I've got a wife and 2 daughters to think about. And what about Clara Sanders? What about her?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Malloy's hands clenched into fists on his desk, the internal struggle playing out across his features. "There's something you should know," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. 3 days ago, the same day Clara disappeared, one of my deputies saw lights moving around the old farm after midnight. Lanterns, like someone was digging. Eli grabbed Sam's arm. "That's it. That's what Clara must have seen." "Did your deputy investigate?" Sam asked. Malloy shook his head. By the time he worked up the courage to check it out, the lights were gone. And the next morning, Cormack's men made it clear that any further interest in their boss's property would be unwelcome. Sam felt the pieces of the puzzle beginning to take shape. "Sheriff, I'm going to ask you straight. Do you think Clara Sanders is still alive?" Malloy was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "I hope so, Mr. McCaid. God help me, I hope so. But if she saw something she shouldn't have then we need to find her before it's too late." Sam stood, his decision made. "Eli, gather your things. We're heading out to that farm." "Mr. McCaid," Malloy called as they reached the door. "Be careful. Cormack's got eyes everywhere, and Morrison's crew don't hesitate to shoot first and ask questions later. I'll keep that in mind." As they stepped back into the morning sun, Eli looked up at Sam with a mixture of hope and fear. "You really think we can find her?" Sam mounted Belle and pulled the boy up behind him. "I think your sister's a fighter, just like her brother. And I think whatever's buried on that farm is worth killing for, which means it's worth dying for too." As they rode toward the edge of town, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. In the distance, the Sanders farm sat like a dark stain against the desert landscape, its broken fences and abandoned buildings holding secrets that men had already died to protect. The real question wasn't whether they'd find Clara Sanders. The question was whether they'd live long enough to get her home safely. Behind them, unseen eyes tracked their progress from the shadows of Tombstone's buildings, and a message was already being sent to Silas Cormack. The cowboy and the boy were heading for the farm. The Sanders farm lay sprawling before them like a graveyard of broken dreams. What had once been a thriving homestead now stood as a testament to decay and abandonment. The main house, a two-story structure that might have been grand in its day, sagged under the weight of neglect. Its windows stared blindly across the desert, their glass long since shattered by wind and time. Sam dismounted and helped Eli down from Belle's back. The boy stood transfixed, staring at the ruins of what had been his family's legacy. "Pa used to bring me here when I was little," Eli whispered, "before Cormack took it. It was beautiful then, fields of corn and wheat, cattle grazing in the pastures. Ma's flower garden was right there by the front porch." Sam studied the layout carefully, his experienced eyes noting details that others might miss. The barn still stood relatively intact, its heavy wooden doors hanging askew. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and in the distance, he could see the remnants of what had once been an extensive irrigation system. "Show me where Clara disappeared," he said. Eli led him to the eastern edge of the property, where a broken fence line marked the boundary between the farm and the open desert. "She was picking wildflowers right here. I was supposed to be watching her, but I got distracted chasing a lizard. When I looked up, she was gone." Sam knelt and examined the ground. 3 days of wind had obscured most tracks, but he could still make out small footprints in the harder-packed earth near the fence posts. More importantly, he found something else, boot prints, much larger, leading from the fence line toward the main house. "Someone was here," he said grimly. "Someone who followed your sister's trail." Eli's face went pale. "Cormack's men? Most likely." Sam stood and brushed the dust from his knees. "Let's check the house first. If Clara's being held somewhere, that's the most logical place." They approached the farmhouse cautiously, Sam's hand resting on his gun butt. The front door hung open, creaking softly in the desert breeze. Inside the house was a maze of shadows and dust-covered furniture. Sunlight filtered through broken windows, creating patches of light and dark that could hide a dozen dangers. "Clara," Eli called out, his voice echoing through the empty rooms. "Clara, it's Eli." No answer came back except the whisper of wind through broken walls. They searched methodically, the kitchen with its rusted stove and overturned chairs, the parlor where family portraits still hung crookedly on the walls, the bedrooms upstairs where children had once dreamed of bright futures. In what had been the master bedroom, Sam found something that made his blood run cold. "Eli, come here." The boy hurried over to where Sam stood beside an old wooden chest. Inside, scattered among moth-eaten clothes and yellowed papers, were fresh items: a child's hair ribbon, still bright blue despite the dust around it, and a small leather shoe. "That's Clara's." Eli grabbed the shoe, his hands trembling. She was wearing these the day she disappeared. Sam's jaw tightened. The presence of Clara's belongings confirmed his worst fears. She hadn't simply wandered off and gotten lost. Someone had brought her here, and they'd been careless enough to leave evidence behind. "There's something else," Sam said, pulling a folded paper from beneath the clothes. It was a map, hand-drawn and detailed, showing the farm's layout with several locations marked with X's. At the bottom, in faded ink, were the words, "The truth lies beneath where the water runs deepest." Eli studied the map with growing excitement. "This is Pa's handwriting. He must have hidden this here before he died." Sam compared the map to the locket's engravings. The symbols matched certain landmarks on the drawing: the old well, the barn, and a spot near the irrigation canal that was marked with multiple X's. "Your pa was trying to tell someone where to look," Sam realized. "But look at this." He pointed to a section of the map that showed recent additions in different ink. "Someone else has been using this map. Someone who's been digging." A sound from outside made them both freeze, the distant rumble of approaching horses. Sam moved quickly to the window and peered through a gap in the boards. 3 riders were approaching the farmhouse, and he recognized Jake Morrison's scarred face among them. "We've got company," Sam whispered. "And they don't look friendly." Eli's eyes went wide with fear. "What do we do?" Sam's mind raced through their options. The house offered little in the way of defensible positions, and being trapped inside would be suicide. But running across open ground would make them easy targets. "The barn," he decided. "We can make it if we move now, while they're still focused on the house." They slipped out the back door and ran in a crouch toward the barn, using the outbuildings as cover. Behind them, they could hear Morrison's voice calling out, "McCaid, we know you're here. Come out and we can discuss this like civilized men." Sam and Eli reached the barn and ducked inside. The interior was filled with old farm equipment and hay bales that provided excellent cover. More importantly, Sam spotted a ladder leading to a hayloft that would give them a clear view of the entire property. "Stay low and stay quiet," he whispered to Eli as they climbed. From the loft, they could see Morrison and his men spreading out to search the buildings. But Sam's attention was drawn to something else: fresh earth near the old well, exactly where the map had indicated one of the X marks. "They've been digging," he murmured, "recently." Eli followed his gaze and gasped. "You think that's where they buried ... Don't think the worst yet," Sam interrupted, though his own thoughts were heading in the same dark direction. "But we need to get closer to that well." Below them, Morrison's voice echoed across the farmyard. "I know you can hear me, McCaid. You're trespassing on private property, and in these parts, that's a hanging offense." Sam studied the layout, calculating distances and angles. The well was about 50 yards from the barn, across open ground. But if they waited until dark, a new sound reached their ears, a faint crying, coming from somewhere underground. Eli's face lit up with hope and terror. "That's Clara. She's alive." The crying seemed to be coming from the direction of the well. Sam's mind raced as he put the pieces together. The old irrigation system, the map's reference to where the water runs deepest. The fresh digging, it all pointed to one conclusion. There's a tunnel system, he realized, connected to the well. That's where they're keeping her. Morrison's voice called out again, closer now. "Last chance, McCaid. Come out peaceful, or we come in shooting." Sam checked his weapons, his Colt .45 and a Winchester rifle he'd brought from his saddle. 3 men against 1, but he'd faced worse odds before. The real problem was protecting Eli and getting to Clara before Morrison decided she was too much of a liability. "Listen to me carefully," he told Eli. "When I start shooting, you stay here in the loft. Don't move, don't make a sound, no matter what happens. Understand? But Clara, I'll get Clara. But I need to know you're safe first." Eli nodded reluctantly, clutching his father's map like a talisman. Sam positioned himself at the loft window, his rifle trained on the farmyard below. Morrison and his men were closing in on the barn, their weapons drawn. In the distance, the crying continued, faint but unmistakable. The time for hiding was over. Clara Sanders was alive, somewhere in the tunnels beneath the farm, and Sam McCaid was the only thing standing between her and the men who would kill to protect their secrets. He took a deep breath, sighted down his rifle barrel, and prepared to even the odds. The first shot shattered the afternoon silence like thunder. Sam's bullet caught Morrison's hat, spinning it off his head and sending the man diving for cover behind a broken wagon. The other two gunmen scattered, seeking shelter behind the farmhouse and an old water trough. "Should have taken my offer, McCaid," Morrison shouted, returning fire. His bullet splintered the barn wall inches from Sam's position. Sam shifted to a different window, keeping the gunman guessing about his location. Below in the hayloft, Eli crouched behind a hay bale, his father's map clutched tightly in his small hands. The boy's face was pale but determined. He understood that Clara's life hung in the balance of this gunfight. "Eli," Sam called softly between shots, "that map of your pa's, does it show how to get into the tunnel system?" The boy studied the faded drawings carefully. "There's a marking here by the well and another by the old root cellar behind the house. Pa drew lines connecting them underground." Sam's mind raced as he processed this information. If Clara was being held in the tunnels, there had to be multiple access points. The question was whether he could reach one without getting shot full of holes. A bullet whined past his ear, followed by Morrison's mocking laughter. "You're outnumbered and outgunned, cowboy. Throw down your weapons and maybe we'll make it quick." Instead of answering, Sam took careful aim and fired. His shot struck the water trough where one of the gunmen was hiding, sending up a spray of splinters and rusty metal. The man yelped and scrambled for better cover. But Sam knew he couldn't win a prolonged gunfight. Morrison's men had plenty of ammunition and reinforcements could arrive at any time. He needed a different strategy. "Eli, I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, I want you to slip out the back of the barn and circle around to that root cellar. Can you do that?" The boy nodded, his jaw set with determination that reminded Sam of soldiers he'd known who were twice Eli's age. Sam gathered several loose hay bales and positioned them near the barn's main doors. Then he struck a match and set them ablaze. Within minutes, thick smoke was billowing from the barn, creating a gray curtain that obscured the entire farmyard. "Now," he whispered to Eli. The boy slipped down the ladder and disappeared through a gap in the barn's back wall. Sam waited a few moments, then burst through the main doors, firing rapidly to keep Morrison's men pinned down while the smoke provided cover. The strategy worked perfectly. Confused by the smoke and Sam's aggressive assault, the gunman fell back toward the farmhouse, giving Eli the opening he needed to reach the root cellar. Sam dove behind the old well, his heart pounding as bullets whistled overhead. From this position, he could hear Clara's crying more clearly. She was definitely somewhere below ground, probably in the tunnel system that connected the well to other parts of the property. "Clara!" He called down into the well's depths. "Clara, can you hear me?" A faint voice echoed up from the darkness. "Help me. Please help me." Sam's blood boiled with rage. Whatever Cormack and his men were up to, using a child as leverage was beyond contempt. He was about to lower himself into the well when Eli's voice called out from the direction of the root cellar. "Mr. McCaid, I found the entrance." The boy was standing beside what looked like an old storm cellar, its wooden doors thrown open to reveal stone steps leading underground. But more importantly, Eli was holding something that made Sam's eyes widen with shock. In the boy's hands was a leather pouch, and spilling from it were dozens of gleaming nuggets that could only be one thing: gold. Pa was right. Eli shouted, his voice carrying across the farmyard despite the ongoing gunfire. There's a whole room down here full of gold, bags and bags of it. Morrison's head snapped up at the word gold, and Sam saw the greed flash in the man's eyes. This was what it had all been about. Not just land, but a hidden treasure that the original Sanders family had discovered and died trying to protect. "Well, well," Morrison called out, a new note of excitement in his voice. "Looks like the boys found what we've been looking for. Boys, change of plans. Take them alive. We need to know exactly what they found down there." But Sam had no intention of being taken alive. He fired 3 quick shots, forcing Morrison's men to keep their heads down, then sprinted toward the root cellar where Eli waited. "How much gold is down there?" he asked as they descended into the tunnel system. "More than I can count," Eli replied, his eyes shining with wonder. "And Mr. McCaid, Clara's down here too. I can hear her calling." The tunnels were older than Sam had expected, carved from solid rock and reinforced with timber supports. Oil lamps hung from the walls, recently lit, indicating that someone had been using these passages regularly. As they moved deeper underground, following the sound of Clara's voice, Sam began to understand the full scope of what they'd stumbled into. This wasn't just a hiding place for stolen gold, it was a complete underground operation. Side passages led to storage rooms filled with mining equipment, and the main tunnel showed signs of recent excavation. Someone had been systematically mining gold from beneath the Sanders farm, using the abandoned property as cover for their operation. "Clara," Eli called out as they rounded a corner. "Clara, where are you?" "Eli." The girl's voice was stronger now, coming from a chamber just ahead. "I'm here. I'm scared." They found her in a small room that had been carved from the living rock, sitting on a pile of old blankets with her hands tied behind her back. Clara Sanders was about 8 years old, with the same determined eyes as her brother, though they were currently filled with tears of relief. "Oh, Eli," she sobbed as her brother untied her bonds. "The bad men brought me down here and said they'd hurt me if I made noise, but I heard you calling." Sam knelt beside the frightened girl, his voice gentle despite the urgency of their situation. "Clara, I'm Sam McCaid. I'm here to help you and your brother get home safe. But first, I need to know, did you see anything before they brought you down here? Anything that might have made them want to keep you quiet?" Clara nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I saw them digging by the old well. They had big bags of shiny rocks, and they were arguing about how much money they were worth. One of them said Mr. Cormack would be angry if he found out they were stealing from him." The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in Sam's mind. Cormack's men had been skimming gold from the mining operation, probably planning to sell it for their own profit. When Clara witnessed the theft, they'd panicked and taken her prisoner to keep her quiet. But that meant Cormack himself might not know about Clara's disappearance, which could work in their favor. "We need to get out of here," Sam said, helping Clara to her feet. "Can you walk, sweetheart?" "I think so," she said bravely. They made their way back through the tunnels, Sam carrying one of the oil lamps to light their path. But as they approached the root cellar entrance, the sound of voices above ground made them freeze. Told you to watch the entrances," Morrison was saying, his voice tight with anger. "If they get away with what they've seen, Boss," another voice interrupted, "maybe we should just cut our losses. Take what gold we can carry and head for Mexico." "And leave a fortune behind?" Morrison snarled. "Not a chance. We're going down there, and we're settling this once and for all." Sam's mind raced through their options. The tunnels had multiple exits, but Morrison's men would be watching all of them by now. They were trapped underground with 2 children and a fortune in gold that men were willing to kill for. But as he looked at Eli and Clara Sanders, 2 brave children who'd already lost so much, Sam McCaid made a decision that would change all their lives forever. "Eli," he said quietly. "Remember what you told me about buying that farm and having a fortune?" The boy nodded. "Well, son, I think it's time we made that fortune work for us." Above them, Morrison's boots echoed on the cellar steps as he began his descent into the tunnels. But Sam McCaid was already formulating a plan that would turn the tables on Cormack's men and ensure that the Sanders children got the justice and the fortune that their family deserved. The final confrontation was about to begin, and this time Sam intended to make sure the good guys won. Hello? How are you? Did you enjoy the story? Like, share, comment on which city you're watching from, and subscribe to the channel to help us continue adding new amazing videos. Thank you very much, and come back often.